Hey guys, it's your girl, Miss Otola, coming in mildly chilly from Fort Wayne this morning, joined by my co-host, Basil Otola, my delightfully handsome German Shepherd. So today we are going to be continuing on our journey through the Vietnam War by doing a little bit of quick review to get this guy started. So these are the things that we talked about yesterday. I want to make sure that we have a firm understanding of what terms like brinkmanship, massive retaliation, domino theory, etc. Like, what do all these things mean, and why is it important to us as we're studying the Cold War? So think to yourself, what does brinkmanship mean? What is massive retaliation? So take a second to recall that information. Brinkmanship and massive retaliation is where a country will threaten war in order to get another country to do what they want. The hope is that the other country will back down. Now, massive retaliation is where you are threatening to use some sort of crazy over-the-top response, such as nuclear weapons. Now, this is a tactic that Eisenhower had been using, and it's kind of a problem, because if you're making such extreme threats, like, retaliating with nuclear weapons, etc., you're going to have to follow through with those threats, because if you don't, then you just look like a schmuck. All right, our next bubble. How does the Soviet Union respond to NATO? I want you guys to take a second and try to recall this information. All right, so if you remember, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It is an alliance that is created between the democratic countries of the West as a common defense system to help defend themselves against communist countries, specifically the Soviet Union. Now, the USSR is going to respond to NATO by creating their own system of defense that they are going to call the Warsaw Pact. It is going to include the Soviet Union and all of those different Eastern European countries that make up the Soviet bloc. So now we have two major alliances in the world. One's the Western democracies and the other are the Eastern communists. NATO and our Warsaw Pact. All right, let's go on to the next little thought bubble. What is the domino theory? Take a second and try to recall. Now, the domino theory is exactly what it sounds like. It is the belief that if one country were to fall to communism, then the others near it would also fall, just like dominoes that have been stacked up next to each other in a line. And so the United States wants to prevent the first domino from falling because we don't want the other subsequent countries to also fall to communism. Which is kind of connected to our next question. What leads to U.S. involvement in Vietnam? Now, this bubble, the reason that I left it for last is because it has a slightly more complicated answer than the rest of our review bubbles. So, as you'll recall, at the Geneva Peace Conference, it was determined that Vietnam would be split at the 17th parallel, and that we would allow these two halves of the country to have free and open elections, but the United States knew that if we allowed that to happen, Ho Chi Minh would get elected, and we did not want Ho Chi Minh to become the next leader of Vietnam because he was a communist. Therefore, the United States sets up a government in South Vietnam in which we install our own democratic leader, Diem. Now, the United States also has battleships and destroyers that we have circling North Vietnam. As I explained to you guys yesterday, we're kind of doing this thing where we say, I'm not touching you, but we're right up in there in the Gulf of Tonkin. And so, once the North Vietnamese fire at our destroyers up in the Gulf of Tonkin, we use this as an excuse to get involved and send a bunch of military personnel over to Vietnam. And before long, we have 500,000 troops over there ready to go. And that is a very short summary of how the United States initially gets involved with this Vietnam story. So let's move on and learn a little bit more today about the United States in the Vietnam War. Now, the United States and North Vietnam are two completely different countries, and so their tactics for fighting in the war are going to be completely different. The United States is a world superpower. We know this. They emerged from World War II as basically the strongest military in the world. Now, North Vietnam is absolutely not even remotely close to us in size, firepower, anything like that. So they are going to have to use a completely different strategy for winning this war. Now, if the United States is planning on coming in and forcing the enemy to surrender by using airstrikes, bombing them into submission, searching and destroying, setting up blockades, all of that, those are all U.S. tactics. Now, North Vietnam cannot really go head-to-head with a country like the United States. You know, if they were going to do a head-to-head battle with us, there's no way that they would win. So North Vietnam is going to take a different tactic, which is known as guerrilla warfare. And they are going to use surprise, attacks to go after this larger enemy, this larger, stronger enemy. They are going to flat out avoid head-to-head battles because they know that they would not win. They are going to use the fact that they are familiar with the terrain to their advantage. And by the way, the United States does not really have much experience fighting in this type of environment. The North Vietnamese are also going to fight during the nighttime, and they are going to use underground tunnels. They are going to surprise us out of nowhere. They're not fighting to win either. They are just fighting to prolong the war and never lose, and hope that the United States gives up and goes away. So just to recap, the United States is going to war with North Vietnam, but we are way more powerful than they are. We have way more money and we have way more firepower. So North Vietnam is going to use a different tactic for fighting us. They're going to use guerrilla warfare. And this is always the tactic that a weaker party will use against a stronger party. Surprise attacks. Now, when we talk about the attack on 9/11 in a few weeks, that's also a form of guerrilla warfare. And it's also a surprise attack by a much weaker party on a much stronger one. It's always what they use. Now, the United States is absolutely going to utilize bombing missions throughout the Vietnam War. These bombing missions were known as Operation Rolling Thunder. Now, Operation Rolling Thunder was essentially a series of missions in which they were dropping phosphorus and napalm to try to get rid of all of the different foliage, and they were basically just burning people to death. And they wanted to basically just burn or bomb Vietnam into submission. They were hoping that if they dropped enough bombs, North Vietnam would give up. But the North Vietnamese were using all of the different forests and rainforests around there to hide. It was part of their guerrilla warfare tactic. So, in addition to Operation Rolling Thunder, which was dropping all of these napalm bombs everywhere, we also have Operation Ranch Hand, which was the United States' defoliation program. By defoliation, I mean their goal was to get rid of all of the trees and shrubs, basically anything that was alive that the North Vietnamese were hiding in. And we used a product called Agent Orange, which you guys have probably heard of Agent Orange before. This is a chemical cocktail. It has all sorts of nasty things in it, including dioxin. And its entire purpose is to kill off millions of acres of jungle. And they're trying to weaken their enemy by leaving them nowhere to hide. But here's the problem. In addition to many other problems that you might be able to identify by destroying hundreds of thousands of acres of jungle. This dioxin, it's a deadly chemical, and it is going to get into the food chain. It is getting into the water supply. Now, when humans come in contact with this chemical through their food chain or the water supply, they are going to have all sorts of chromosomal damage done to them. And so, the Vietnam War is going to have a longer lasting legacy than anybody ever anticipated at the time, because there are people that have physical deformities still as a result of this chemical getting into their water supply and food chain over there. So this picture right here is an example of what the bombing campaigns would look like. This is a photo of Operation Ranch Hand. You can see that they are just dropping this Agent Orange over the forests. It literally just looks like it's a giant spray can going through. And of course, as I just told you guys, the entire point of Operation Ranch Hand is a defoliation program. They want to get rid of all of these forests and shrubbery and whatnot, because that is where the North Vietnamese are hiding. It's part of their guerrilla warfare. They're popping out in the night. And this is what it would look like after they were done. Those trees have been burnt to heck. It's pretty scary looking. And as you can see, many people suffered from, painful burns. The picture on the left shows a bunch of children running from a recently bombed area. Most of the people that suffered during this war were just regular civilians. They were peasants. They were people that lived in the villages. The photo on the right shows an example of what some of these physical deformities would look like. And again, we still see the effects of these bombing missions today. The Vietnam War has left quite a lasting legacy on this entire region, and I can't even begin to tell you guys, there are so many different ways that the Vietnam War has affected this area. Not just the fact that we've caused entire generations of people to suffer from, physical deformities, but we also have the issue of UXOs over there, which is enormous, which I'm going to get to in a hot second. So, here's the scoop here. If you look at the map on the left, you will notice that there is a major trail that is running from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. This is called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You will also notice that part of this trail goes through Laos. Now, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a very important route that the Viet Cong used to move soldiers and supplies through Cambodia and Laos between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Now, Laos was supposed to be neutral. If you remember yesterday when we talked about the Geneva Peace Conference and the Geneva Peace Accords. So Laos was supposed to be a neutral country. Nevertheless, American B-52s began carpet bombing the crap out of Laos and eastern Cambodia. I can't even speak right now. I'm so sorry, guys. In total, we dropped more than 2 million tons of bombs. We killed almost 500,000 civilians, all in the name of bombing the bejeebies out of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Now, this bombing was kept a secret from the American people and the rest of the world. During our bombing campaign on Laos, we dropped an equivalent of a plane load of bombs every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day for 9 years straight. This makes Laos the most heavily bombed per capita country in the world. And all the while, they were neutral. The only thing they had going on was that they had a trail that was going through their country. So at this point, if we were in the classroom together, I would stop and I would ask you guys, why was the United States so interested in bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail? And if you were in front of me, you guys would all have your hands in the air, super excited and ready to answer questions. I would never have to pick on somebody randomly. And you would tell me, oh, because the Viet Cong were using this to ship supplies between the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese. And I would be delighted by you. So this is where we are going to stop today. Tomorrow's lesson is going to focus on UXOs, or unexploded ordnance, which goes along with today's lesson. So please see Google Classroom for your assignment for the day. Thanks. Bye.